Consciousness, awareness, and mindfulness are all terms that often arise in discussions about the nature of mind, introspection, and contemplative practice. Yet these words can be ambiguous in casual usage, which makes it helpful to clarify their meanings in a more precise way. Some people in a Hindu tradition or in related contemplative communities use various Sanskrit terms to differentiate subtle aspects that simple English words like consciousness or awareness might lump together. This distinction can be compared to a scenario in which individuals living in a perpetually snowy environment have many different words for snow, each describing a nuanced variety of the same phenomenon. In discussions about mind and reality, these finer distinctions can be significant. They allow people to differentiate between what might be called the deeper ground of being and the particular ways that ground is reflected in our day-to-day experiences of seeing, thinking, and feeling. Some texts speak of something referred to as pure consciousness. This is the notion that underlying all experiences, there is a foundational luminosity or presence. A well-known analogy describes the difference between a sun and the moon. The moon, on its own, does not produce any light. It reflects the radiance of the sun. Similarly, our ordinary experience of being aware, thinking, remembering, perceiving resembles moonlight in that it is a reflection. The actual source, which is compared to sunlight, is a deeper principle that might be called pure consciousness. According to this interpretation, one might be living in the equivalent of night, only witnessing the reflected glow and not seeing the original source directly. The mind receives and channels that deeper presence, but from the vantage of everyday life, people mistake the reflection for the true source. In Sanskrit, some authors draw a line between what might be called Vrittijnana and Swarupajnana. The first term, Vrittijnana, indicates consciousness as expressed in the mind, awareness shaped by perceptions, thoughts, memories, emotions, and so on. Each specific event of seeing, hearing, or contemplating is considered a vritti, or movement in the mind, which is illuminated by deeper consciousness. This Vrittijnana is the type of consciousness that is normally measured or described in psychology and common conversation. When people say, "I am aware of this object," or "I am aware of feeling hungry," typically they refer to that interplay of mental processes with a sense of personal awareness. It is a limited, focused reflection of a more expansive principle. On the other hand, Swarupajnana points to what is sometimes called pure consciousness, or consciousness itself. This is portrayed as the fundamental luminosity that does not depend on thoughts or sensory input. People who are steeped in these traditions claim that even if one were to shut down all senses, cease all mental chatter, and exist in complete stillness, this ground of consciousness would remain. In everyday experience, it is overshadowed by the busyness of the mind. Much like the presence of the sun can be overlooked when one fixates on moonlit nights. A classic question that arises in many philosophical debates is whether consciousness would vanish if there were no mental content. One perspective is that consciousness remains even if it is not reflecting anything at that moment. That deeper principle might be experienced in certain profound states of meditation or in dreamless sleep, though many people do not consciously register it because the usual link between mental activity and recognition of one's own presence is absent. Some people in modern discussions raise a question about how awareness can even be meaningful if it is not manifesting as tangible mental events. There is a tendency to think that if we are not thinking or perceiving something specific, then awareness might not be there. But in certain meditative contexts, practitioners report a bare sense of being, a condition of silent clarity that is not about a specific object or mental process. This is sometimes described as recognizing awareness itself, separate from the fluctuations of thought. Such states can be fleeting or stable, depending on a person's practice and realization. A further layer involves mindfulness, a term that has become quite popular in modern psychology and wellness fields. Contemporary mindfulness practices often trace their inspiration to ancient forms of meditation, in many cases linked to Buddhist traditions, although parallels can also be found in older Hindu teachings. Mindfulness typically means a directed, purposeful attention to one's present experiences, sensory inputs, thoughts, feelings, or surroundings, without the usual overlays of judgment and constant verbal commentary. This deliberate act of focusing is said to refine the mind's ability to recognize what is occurring in real time. It may also reduce stress, improve emotional regulation, or deepen one's appreciation of daily life. However, from the vantage of the deeper discourse on consciousness, mindfulness is understood as a skillful use of that reflected awareness in the mind, what was labeled as Vrittijnana, to direct attention towards something with clarity. Mindfulness training encourages the mind to stay anchored in the present, whether it is the breath, bodily sensations, or tasks at hand. Modern research on mindfulness sometimes identifies benefits such as increased mental resilience, greater empathy, and reduced anxiety, which aligns with the idea that the mind, when more focused, interacts with experiences in a calmer, more measured way. Although mindfulness is beneficial, it does not necessarily equate to discovering that deeper, sun-like consciousness. It can, however, be a step in that direction, as a calmer, more attentive mind might then become curious about the source of awareness itself. One reason mindfulness is considered powerful is that the mind has limited bandwidth for conscious processing. By focusing that bandwidth deliberately, one experiences deeper engagement with tasks and fosters a state of heightened clarity. Some researchers connect this to flow, a state in which a person becomes immersed in an activity so thoroughly that self-consciousness fades and performance becomes fluid and enjoyable. The capacity to remain steadily present is crucial not only in spiritual practice, but also in everyday endeavors like studying, playing a sport, or engaging in creative work. One might say that mindfulness is about harnessing the moonlight, the reflected consciousness, in a concentrated and skillful manner. There is also an interplay between mindfulness and the possibility of glimpsing that deeper consciousness. Some traditions emphasize that when the reflective mind calms down through sustained attention, it becomes less turbulent. As a result, the underlying luminosity of pure consciousness can shine through more distinctly. In such contexts, mindfulness serves as a preliminary discipline that sets the stage for insight into one's fundamental nature. This approach is reminiscent of clearing a dusty mirror so that one can eventually see what is actually being reflected. Once the dust of distraction and scattered thought is wiped away, people might notice something that transcends the usual mental fluctuations. Another aspect of this conversation deals with the difference between simply being conscious in a conventional sense, knowing that one is awake, perceiving objects, feeling sensations, and the recognition of pure consciousness. The conventional sense arises from the functioning of sensory organs and the mind, typically leading to statements like, "I see a chair, I am reading a book, I remember something from yesterday." But for some contemplative traditions, that is not the end point. They point out that all these experiences, though important, rest on a more essential presence that is not altered by the comings and goings of thoughts and perceptions. It might be helpful to note that languages often do not have enough words to distinguish these nuances. In English, awareness and consciousness can be used interchangeably in many contexts, and sometimes mindfulness is loosely used for both. But in more meticulous philosophical or spiritual discourse, people might separate them as follows. Awareness might indicate the reflective sense of noticing something. Consciousness might serve as a placeholder term for the fundamental presence that enables all noticing, and mindfulness might refer specifically to a trained, deliberate focus on present experiences. However, the lines can blur because these terms carry different connotations for different groups. Some, for example, might use awareness to denote the ultimate ground, and consciousness to mean the active, moment-by-moment sense of being conscious. The point is that standard dictionary definitions do not necessarily capture the depth of these nuances. Within the many discussions happening today, some researchers in neuroscience explore how mindfulness techniques change patterns of activity in the brain, measuring shifts in the regions associated with attention, empathy, or emotional regulation. They find that regular mindfulness practice can yield measurable benefits, such as decreased stress hormone levels or improved resilience under pressure. This aligns with the idea that when the mind is better able to self-regulate, a person can handle challenges more effectively. None of that research directly addresses the deeper question of whether the mind is merely reflecting a universal consciousness, but does highlight that harnessing attention can produce noticeable real-world improvements in mental and physical well-being. For those who pursue a more spiritual or philosophical inquiry, one might see mindfulness as the beginning of a trail leading to subtler questions. If I can pay attention to what is happening in my mind, then what is this I that witnesses both the mind and its process of paying attention? Could it be that the real I is not the mind itself, but something that illuminates the mind, something more akin to that sunlight that remains even when there is no moonlight? Some traditions hold that by persistently investigating such a question, allowing the mind to become calm, turning the attention inward to the nature of awareness itself, one may intuit or realize that deeper consciousness. Many teachings emphasize that such a realization is not about acquiring new information, but about recognizing what has always been present yet overlooked due to the distraction of constant mental activity. Another distinction sometimes highlighted is that mindful attention typically has an object of focus, a breath, a bodily sensation, a thought stream, or a task. One is trained to notice in a sustained manner the present occurrence without drifting into autopilot or anxious rumination. But once that skill is refined, a person might be directed to notice not just the object, but also the sense of witnessing that object. This shift can lead to what some call awareness of awareness, a state in which the mind steps back from all objects and sees itself as an instrument of reflection. People who explore this direction sometimes describe a profound sense of stillness or openness that is not attached to particular mental events. That stillness might be closer to what the tradition calls pure consciousness or Swarupajnana. There is also an interesting synergy between these ideas and certain lines of modern philosophical thought. Some contemporary thinkers try to differentiate access consciousness, the form of consciousness that deals with reporting, reasoning, and controlling behavior, from phenomenal consciousness, the raw feel of being. Others analyze the difference between unconscious processes and the conscious mind. In these debates, the question arises whether there is a baseline awareness that is not entirely captured by mental content. Such modern arguments echo, in some manner, the old claims that there is a principle underlying mind and body, a principle that can reveal itself once the usual channels of external engagement are stilled. From a practical standpoint, a person might ask, how do these distinctions help me in daily life? One possible answer is that clarifying them can enrich both meditative and everyday experiences. By understanding mindfulness as a deliberate focusing of mental awareness, people can become better at paying attention to tasks, managing stress, and fostering empathy. By understanding the difference between day-to-day awareness, Vrittijnana, and a subtler form of consciousness, Swarupajnana, a seeker might open up to experiences of deeper stillness and an unshakable sense of presence that offers peace amid life's turbulence. This does not necessarily conflict with scientific or therapeutic perspectives. It simply provides another lens, suggesting that beyond the typical workings of the mind, there might be a dimension that illuminates all experience from behind the scenes. Such a concept resonates with how some describe the source of creativity or insight. People might say that when the mind quiets, ideas seem to emerge from a silent wellspring. Certain narratives about scientific discoveries or artistic inspiration mention sudden realizations that feel like they have come from beyond ordinary thinking. While one does not need to believe in pure consciousness to appreciate these moments, a viewpoint that posits an underlying luminous presence can interpret such insights as glimpses of that more fundamental background peeking through when mental chatter subsides. Even if one does not adopt that viewpoint literally, it can serve as a helpful metaphor for understanding the creative process. It is also worth noting that these discussions sometimes spark confusion or debate when people assume that pure consciousness is akin to being in a trance or losing all sense of personal identity. The claim that deeper consciousness remains even when the mind is quiet does not necessarily mean that one becomes non-functional or oblivious. Some spiritual traditions hold that a person can remain aware of that deeper principle even while engaging in normal activities, bridging the sense of a stable, unbounded presence and the daily tasks that require ordinary mental reflection. The mind acts as an interface with the world, but one never loses touch with that abiding ground. Much like someone who clearly realizes that moonlight is actually sunlight, can still enjoy moonlit nights without confusion. Ultimately, the important takeaway is the multi-layered nature of what people label as consciousness. On one layer, there is the normal event-based awareness, the mental process that allows us to sense, think, and remember. On a deeper layer, there's a principle that might be called pure consciousness, which is said to be self-luminous and not dependent on any single mental episode. Then there's mindfulness, which is the skillful focusing of the reflective mind on a chosen target, done with the intention of cultivating clarity, calm, or insight. Mindfulness can be taught in secular contexts, harnessing the beneficial aspects of focusing attention, while other contexts see it as part of a broader journey to realize the fundamental nature of awareness. The interplay of these concepts can be approached from multiple angles: psychological, neurological, ethical, or spiritual. Many individuals find it fruitful to explore all of these angles, seeing no inherent contradiction in bridging scientific inquiry with contemplative practice. Some might also point out that the vocabulary used to talk about these matters varies tremendously depending on the culture or era. Certain traditions in a Hindu lineage use terms such as chit or samvid to denote the luminous core. Some from other traditions speak of the clear light of emptiness. People with no formal background in spiritual traditions might simply say they feel an ungraspable presence when they are very still. While the labels can differ, the underlying human fascination with the nature of being conscious remains universal. Discussions about consciousness, awareness, and mindfulness revolve around that perennial interest in who we are at the deepest level, how we experience the world, and how we might train our minds for greater clarity and peace. In sum, consciousness and awareness can be used interchangeably in casual speech, yet in more specialized contexts, they might point to distinct levels of reality. One level involves the mental events that populate everyday life, our experiences of color, sound, emotion, and memory. Another points to the foundational presence or luminosity that many spiritual traditions assert is the actual basis of all experience. Meanwhile, mindfulness describes a deliberate practice of focusing one's reflective awareness. That act of focusing can lead to better concentration, emotional well-being, and, in some traditions, it can help the mind discover an underlying ground that is not just another event in the mental continuum. Whether someone is interested in a purely practical application of mindfulness for stress reduction or in a more profound inquiry into the nature of existence, distinguishing these concepts can be vital. By examining how they interrelate, like the moonlight and the sunlight, the reflection and the source, people can gain insights into the mind's functioning, develop healthier modes of attention, and possibly glimpse what some have called the unchanging, ever-present essence that stands behind all knowledge and experience.